Hi, and welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I'm focusing on the idea of telling the story, and I'm at the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada. I want to take you through some of the exhibitions here at this museum, which is associated with the Smithsonian Institution, of course, of Washington, D.C., and I also want to focus on a series of considerations that gets into this idea of the story and some of the specific content behind the Atomic Testing Museum, which is one of the more popular of the new museums in Las Vegas. As you can see here, what is displayed is a bunker, and this is part of a series of videos that you can watch while you're at the museum. And this particular one is constructed or shown in what is constructed to appear like a bunker. And I think this is one of many attempts at the museum to give the guest a sense of some level of immersion, to try to show not just with your typical museum depictions of words and text and dioramas and so forth, but also to try to immerse the guest in as many parts of the experiences as possible at this particular museum. So as you can see here, a number of the exhibits are laid out, I think, as you would see in a traditional museum, and perhaps at some level there could have been more immersive opportunities here in some of these displays. And I think one of the things to ask yourself, particularly if you're setting up the challenge of trying to educate and also entertain, which so many museums are involved in today as they compete with theme parks and other interactive immersive spaces, is to what extent you could balance the immersive interactive material in a museum like this one with the educational aspects. And I think, as we'll see here in just a bit, this also leads us into the question of how do you tell the specific story relative to the type of museum that you're offering to the guest. So here's one example of an interactive element that I suppose you could say attempts to immerse you in the environment, in the story of atomic testing. In this case, it's a Geiger counter, which I would question, does this exactly go far enough as far as an immersive experience? And of course, any immersive experience is always connected to the story that's being told. If you're not familiar with the National Atomic Testing Museum in Vegas, and I do recommend that you definitely attend and visit this interesting museum, you may not be aware of the specific story being told. So in the case of this museum, they're telling a difficult story. The entirety of the history of the atomic bomb program in the U.S., the Manhattan Project, the many testing operations, and the unfortunate uses in warfare. And this actually leads me to this question that I want to raise today, or a series of 4 questions, a series of 4 considerations that specifically relate to the nature of the story being told here at the museum. And I'd like you to focus on these because I believe these really do offer us some insights about what's at play when you're telling a story, particularly a story that has some controversial connotations. And so looking at this first part of one of the exhibitions here, I think we can see exactly what is at play here in terms of the controversy of this story as you see this particular placard, and I'll focus on it more specifically here in just a bit. But this leads to my first question for you. How do you tell the story of a thing, event, or set of circumstances that has, wrapped up in it, a multitude of opinions, views, emotions, and perspectives? And to reference this question, we can look at one of the placards here. And the guest will see this early in his or her visit to the museum. And if you scroll to the top, it addresses the fact that a decision had to be made to pursue atomic testing and atomic weaponry. And as you can see at the top of the quote on this placard, a fundamental government function is to protect its citizens from enemies. And what's curious about this is you, in a sense, could get the idea that it's justifying the decision to use these weapons and the many costs that are associated with them. And in fact, if you review some of the social media on Yelp and some of the online discussions of this museum, this criticism of what could be called the ideology of the museum comes up. And this, in fact, leads to a second question. How will you deal with any of the controversies associated with the story being told? And to address this question, I show you another exhibition here, and this focuses on the disposal of nuclear waste, which for me, living in the state of Nevada, I know is a controversial issue with the Yucca Mountain test site. And in this particular case, you'll see there is, again, a justification at an ideological level to suggest that much has been done to protect the public from the nuclear waste. And although this might be true, we have to keep in mind that there will be controversies that relate to any story being told in a museum like this one. This then leads to my third question for you today. How will you balance immersion with introspection? And this refers to the fact that any visitor to a museum brings with him or her any number of presuppositions about the particular issues that are being considered in the space. And thus, in this case, as we look at this part of the museum near the end of the visit to the museum, there's a reference to 9/11. And for me, as I think about my own presuppositions and my own political biases, I just wasn't able to make the connection between atomic testing and 9/11. And I think in the end, maybe ideologically, this could be seen by some visitors to the museum as an attempt to justify the use of atomic weapons, as I reference in some earlier issues. And then the fourth and final issue I have for you today is how open or polyvocal should the story of your space be? And so then, in reference to a number of the issues I focused on today, the idea of openness in telling a story, or the idea of polyvocality in telling a story, is the notion that there are multiple voices and perspectives shown throughout an exhibition, throughout an immersive space. Now, I will say there are moments at the National Atomic Testing Museum where the guest is told a story about some of the devastation caused by atomic testing. They are also told a story about some of the concerns that people had and how hard and difficult it was to make some of the decisions to pursue both the testing and use of atomic weapons. So I'm not saying the museum doesn't present this. But on the other hand, I think they could have told more of the stories or involved more of the stories in the different ways that they immerse the guests within the museum. For example, they could have offered more perspectives of environmentalists who do have concerns about the Yucca Mountain testing site. They could have also talked about some of the healthcare professionals who dealt with birth defects and other ails and illnesses that were related to atomic testing, particularly in the Marshall Islands. They also could have focused on the perspectives of peace activists and others who might suggest that there is more to be said about this particular story. But of course, all in all, we should recognize that telling a polyvocal or more open story may not be appropriate for every immersive space. I just thought, on a personal reflection coming through the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, that they could have done a bit of a better job in terms of bringing in broader perspectives and perhaps suggesting ultimately in the end some doubt. And again, this focuses on the openness of the story being told, offering some doubt to the guest about the whole program. Are we indeed better off because of atomic testing, or were there other alternatives to pursue more peaceful routes or the use of conventional military forces to deal with some of the supposed threats that we dealt with as a result of our testing and use of atomic weapons? In the end, I think there was an opportunity for introspection, at least on my part, after visiting the museum. So I do encourage you to visit this museum and perhaps in your own ways deal with the challenges, limitations, and lack of perspectives that are offered at this museum. And I do hope you will get a chance to visit other immersive spaces like this one in Las Vegas, and please return and listen to additional video features for the Immersive Worlds Handbook.